Prince William had been minutes away from entering a royal briefing when the message reached him. He stopped, read the solicitor's confirmation twice, and cancelled everything. The reason was not political. It was painfully personal. Diana's protected archive, letters, private records, correspondence, and material preserved beyond her lifetime, had not been entrusted to her sons jointly. According to the legal confirmation placed before William, control had been left to Princess Anne alone. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had entered the mourning expecting procedure, not betrayal. The royal briefing was a meeting where advisors reviewed family matters before decisions were made, and this one concerned access to records connected to his mother. He had expected dates, permissions, and safeguards. Instead, the future king found proof that Diana had deliberately placed authority outside the hands of both sons. That mattered because these papers were not distant history. They were pieces of a mother he had lost before adulthood, preserved behind rules he never knew existed. The prince lowered the solicitor's letter and remained silent long enough for the room to tighten around him. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Why had nobody told him? The legal advisor answered. Princess Anne had not been given ceremonial responsibility. She held custodianship, meaning the legal duty to protect the archive and decide access under Diana's written conditions. William read the sentence again. His anger was controlled, but the hurt underneath was unmistakable. Someone had decided that love did not automatically give him the right to open every door his mother left behind. Anne received the cancellation almost immediately. She did not celebrate. She did not defend herself. The Princess Royal, Charles's sister and one of the family's longest-serving working royals, understood what the message meant. William knew. More painfully, she knew why Diana had chosen her, and she knew the explanation could wound him before helping him understand. Then the solicitors delivered the detail that changed everything again. One restricted part of the archive carried a handwritten instruction from Diana herself. Anne had possessed the authority to act on it for years, yet she had never opened that sealed portion. William set his briefing folder on the table, looked toward his aide, and spoke without hesitation. Cancel the room. He wanted no officials between himself and the truth. Before another document was discussed, before another palace explanation could soften the blow, William wanted Anne face to face. The institutional conversation was over. The family reckoning was about to begin, and Anne already knew the question he was coming to ask. William's shock was not simply about losing control of documents. It was about discovering that his mother had made a choice, involving someone he had trusted all his life. Anne was not a stranger placed between Diana and her sons. She was William's aunt, Charles's sister, and one of the monarchy's most disciplined guardians. That made Diana's decision more understandable, and, for William, far more difficult to emotionally escape. William carried that question away from the cancelled briefing and into a private conversation with Catherine. The Princess of Wales, his wife and closest personal support inside the royal family, listened as he admitted what hurt most. He did not resent Anne. He trusted her. That was exactly the problem. If Diana had chosen someone distant, he could have dismissed the decision as legal caution. But she had chosen family, someone known for discipline, privacy, and an almost stubborn refusal to feed palace gossip. Catherine heard the conflict immediately. William was not asking who controlled the archive. He was asking why his mother believed control should belong to anyone but her sons. Anne felt the weight from the opposite side. The Princess Royal, a senior working member of the family, known for duty over drama, sat alone with the archive key inventory before her. That inventory was simply the formal record of which protected materials existed and who could authorize access to them. She remembered Diana's insistence that closeness must never become automatic permission. For years, she had obeyed that rule without explanation. Now William knew enough to demand one, and she feared the truth might reopen grief he had spent decades learning to contain. Then another detail reached William through the solicitor's documented briefing note. Diana's archive did not contain only private letters or sentimental keepsakes. It also preserved records of conversations involving royal advisors, household officials, and family members during some of the most difficult years of her life. More unsettling still, Anne had kept a handwritten instruction from Diana, stating that emotional proximity must never automatically equal archival authority. The sentence landed hard. It did not sound like rejection. It sounded like a safeguard designed against grief itself. Catherine watched William read the confirmation again. He folded the page carefully instead of crushing it, and that small act told her the anger was changing. He no longer wanted to tear through every barrier simply because he could. He wanted the reason behind the barrier. And somewhere inside those records, William sensed, was the answer Anne feared giving him. That reason did not begin with the solicitors, nor with Anne's silence. It began years earlier, with one confrontation that changed how Diana believed her story would survive. Long before William canceled a briefing, Diana had already imagined the battle that might follow her absence. The turning point came after one deeply unsettling private meeting, when she realized that personal papers could become weapons depending on who controlled them. What happened that night changed the way she thought about memory, family loyalty, and protection. By the time she spoke to Anne afterward, she was no longer deciding who she loved most. She was deciding who could withstand pressure. Diana had already begun separating personal material from correspondence, keeping some records apart, because she feared that grief, reputation, and royal pressure could one day distort their meaning. The archive was becoming more than a collection of letters. It was becoming a protected record of her voice. That mattered, because future arguments over her life could easily turn private words into ammunition, especially if the people controlling them also had something to defend. The pressure became real during a late evening discussion at Kensington Palace. A senior palace advisor urged Diana to surrender copies of private correspondence for what he called institutional safeguarding. The implication disturbed her. Institutional safeguarding meant placing sensitive material under official household control for protection and future management. Diana refused. She understood that once everything entered the system, she might never again control how it was interpreted, restricted, or released. Anne heard about the confrontation from Diana in a private conversation afterward. The Princess Royal listened as she was told something personal. William and Harry must never be forced to choose between mourning their mother and administering her secrets. Diana feared that a son searching for comfort could become trapped inside the colder duty of deciding what history was allowed to see. Anne understood the logic, but she rejected the responsibility. She warned that William might someday believe she had stood between him and his mother. Diana did not retreat. She told Anne that the risk of resentment was exactly why she trusted her. Someone had to be strong enough to say no, even to family. She then outlined 2 levels of access: ordinary material that could eventually be shared, and a sealed collection whose release would depend on Anne deciding that its meaning could no longer be twisted by grief, anger, or advantage. The decision became final when Diana placed a handwritten envelope before Anne. She made the purpose painfully clear. This was not about protecting royal reputations. It was about protecting meaning. Anne finally accepted, knowing the promise could cost her William's trust. Years later, that promise would place Anne directly across from William, with no solicitor capable of softening what Diana had asked her to do. William did not arrive looking for a fight. That made the confrontation more dangerous. He entered the private room without aids, closed the door, and remained standing while Anne waited beside the table. Neither raised their voice. Neither needed to. Between them sat one question that had survived Diana herself. Why had a mother entrusted the record of her life to her former sister-in-law instead of to her eldest son? William asked it almost immediately. Why you? The prince did not soften the words, because there was nothing ceremonial left between them now. Anne answered just as directly. The Princess Royal confirmed that the solicitor's interpretation was correct. Diana had granted her sole custodial authority. Custodial authority meant the legal responsibility to protect the archive, control access, and obey the conditions attached to it. She had followed those conditions for years, even when doing so meant refusing people close to the royal household. The tension sharpened when William asked the question underneath the question. Had his mother doubted him? Anne's answer came without hesitation. No. Diana had feared the burden, not the son. She had believed that grief could make even a loving decision impossible to separate from longing, anger, or guilt. William absorbed that in silence, but the explanation did not comfort him. He finally admitted that he would rather have been trusted with the burden than protected from understanding why it existed. Anne did not flinch. She told him that response was exactly what Diana had anticipated. Love, she said through the private account preserved in her own written notes of their earlier conversation, could become a force strong enough to destroy neutrality. That was why she had been chosen. Not because she loved Diana more, not because she outranked anyone, because she could say no and survive being hated for it. Then Anne revealed something William had not expected. Over the years, she had rejected informal requests for access, disguised as historical research, legacy management, and institutional review. Each request had been turned away because the conditions were not met. William realized the barriers around the archive had not been theoretical. His aunt had already defended them. The final blow came when Anne placed one sealed packet between them. His name was written on it. William pulled out a chair but did not sit. The anger left his face, replaced by something heavier. Anne rested her hand on the packet and said quietly, "Your mother knew this day would come." William had reached the answer he demanded, but the greater shock was waiting inside the next truth. Even Anne did not have unlimited power over what Diana had left behind. The palace had titles, advisors, protocols, and centuries of authority. None of them could simply override one dead woman's written conditions. William discovered that afternoon that Anne's control came with boundaries of its own. She was powerful only because Diana's instructions made her powerful. And inside those instructions was something even more unsettling, a mechanism designed specifically to stop future kings, courtiers, and relatives from reshaping the archive for their own purposes. William listened as the solicitors clarified what that actually meant. Anne was the custodian, the person legally responsible for protecting the material and controlling access under Diana's private instructions. But she could not simply do whatever she wished. Every decision had to follow conditions written years earlier. That distinction mattered because even William's future position as king could not automatically erase a private arrangement created beyond normal palace administration. Public power stopped at the edge of a promise his mother had deliberately protected. The prince felt the contradiction immediately. He could influence the future of the monarchy, yet he could not command open a sealed packet connected to his own family. Anne carried the pressure differently. She knew that enforcing Diana's wishes might permanently damage her relationship with William, but breaking those wishes would destroy the very trust that had placed the archive in her hands. Neither position felt like victory. Both felt like duty sharpened into pain. Then the legal explanation deepened. One solicitor, speaking through the documented briefing prepared for the family, described a release provision built into Diana's instructions. A release provision was a condition allowing protected material to be opened only when specific requirements had been satisfied. In this case, Anne had to believe the people involved could confront the records without using them for revenge, reputation management, or institutional advantage. Anne finally admitted something she had kept to herself. She had considered using that provision once before. She stopped because Charles remained too emotionally entangled in what the archive might contain about Diana's final years. The king was not accused of wrongdoing. The problem was simpler and more dangerous. History between them was still too raw for neutrality. Charles received the private summary later that day. He read Anne's name once, then again. The monarch set the page down and asked the question no one in the room expected. "Does William know there is material in that archive connected to me?" The crisis had just moved beyond William and Anne. Charles now understood that Diana's safeguards had been designed around pressures he remembered all too well. Charles had survived decades of public judgment about Diana. But this was different. Nothing had been published. No accusation had been announced. Yet the existence of sealed material beyond his control forced him back into a chapter he could never fully escape. When he learned that Anne, and only Anne, could decide whether certain records would ever be opened, the monarch faced something painfully unfamiliar. A family decision in which his crown gave him no final word. Charles understood immediately that William's cancelled briefing was no minor administrative interruption. The prince had stopped the palace machinery because he refused to let officials interpret Diana's wishes before the family understood them. That mattered because anything inside the archive could shape how William remembered both parents, and it could also affect how one of the monarchy's most painful periods was understood in the future. The king knew this was not simply about documents. It was about memory, loyalty, and old wounds that had never disappeared. The monarch asked Anne to speak privately. The Princess Royal listened as her brother finally put the fear into words. Had Diana chosen her because she feared him? Anne did not offer comfort she could not justify. She explained that Diana's concern had been broader. The pressure she feared came from systems, advisors, family loyalties, and the instinct to protect institutions when emotions became dangerous. Charles heard the distinction, but it still landed heavily. He knew how easily duty and self-protection could begin sounding like the same thing. William learned about the conversation soon afterward and reacted sharply. The future king worried that his mother's archive could become another battlefield, with Diana's memory pulled against palace reputation once again. He did not accuse Charles directly, but his position was clear. No one would use those papers to repair history, punish the past, or defend an institution at his mother's expense. Charles understood the warning because he understood the history behind it. Anne then gave her brother the detail that changed his response. Through Diana's preserved written instructions, she explained that the sealed packet had never been designed to punish Charles. Its purpose was to stop future generations from turning unresolved family pain into public warfare. Diana had even anticipated that William might someday hold more authority than everyone around him, so she created a structure powerful enough to make him listen before he acted. Charles remained seated after Anne left. He reached toward the summary, then stopped. The king called his aide and gave one quiet instruction. William would make the next decision without interference from him. For the first time since the crisis began, power moved away from control and toward trust. And that opened the door to the private conversation Diana had apparently planned all along. No lawyers entered the room this time. No courtiers waited outside with briefing folders. William and Anne sat facing one another as family, not office holders, and the silence between them felt different now. Anger had burned away, leaving something harder to resist: grief. Anne placed Diana's sealed instruction between them, and finally explained why she had waited. She had never been protecting the archive from William. She had been waiting until William no longer needed to fight it. Anne spoke first, and for once there was no legal language between them. The Princess Royal explained that Diana's final instruction allowed William to receive a personal message only when he came seeking understanding, rather than immediate authority. The instruction was more than a letter. It was a private condition governing when the message could be handed over and why. That mattered, because Diana had feared that truth, released at the wrong moment, could become another weapon inside a family already shaped by grief. William opened the message slowly. The prince read every line without interruption, and the meaning was harder than rejection because it was rooted in love. Diana had worried that guilt, anger, and duty might one day become impossible for him to separate. If he controlled everything too soon, she feared he would feel responsible not only for preserving her memory, but for defending it. William had spent years believing strength meant carrying more. His mother had apparently believed strength sometimes meant being spared a burden until he could face it without being consumed by it. Anne finally admitted what the guardianship had cost her. Through the private conversation now taking place between them, she told William that every refusal had carried the same fear, that Diana's sons might believe she was withholding their mother from them. She had accepted being misunderstood, because breaking the conditions would have betrayed the woman who trusted her. William looked at her differently after that. For the first time, he understood that He understood that Anne had not been standing between him and Diana. She had been standing in the place Diana asked her to hold. Then came the sentence that ended the argument. Diana's message made clear that William had never been excluded because he was untrusted. She had chosen Anne because she wanted one person capable of saying no to him, even after he became the most powerful royal of his generation. William did not demand the sealed records. Instead, he pushed the archive key back toward Anne. "Then it stays with you." Anne closed her hand around it, and the struggle for control ended there. But the cancelled briefing was already public. Their private decision was about to become a national story, and the world would soon decide what William's surrender of control truly meant. By morning, the cancelled briefing was no longer a palace secret. What began as a private legal confirmation exploded into a public argument about Diana, William, Anne, and who had truly been trusted with the princess's memory. Yet the most powerful detail was not that William had been denied control. It was what he did after learning the truth. Instead of challenging Anne's authority, the future king had chosen to preserve the boundary his mother deliberately created. William felt the exposure immediately. Palace communications confirmed only that the briefing had been cancelled and that a private archival matter had been resolved within the family. That wording mattered because the household refused to release Diana's confidential instructions, meaning the public could see the consequence without seeing the private reason behind it. The prince knew speculation would fill the gap. He also knew that publishing his mother's message simply to defend himself would violate the restraint he had just promised to respect. The debate turned quickly. Commentators first framed the story as Diana excluding her eldest son from something deeply personal. Then the meaning shifted when William's decision became known. He was not contesting Anne's custodianship. He was accepting it. Custodianship, in this case, meant the protected responsibility to control access according to Diana's conditions rather than personal preference. That distinction transformed the story from one about rejection into one about self-control. Anne felt that change more deeply than she expected. The Princess Royal listened as aides summarized coverage describing her not as William's rival, but as the person Diana had trusted to resist pressure from anyone, including future kings. For years, she had feared that keeping the promise might make her appear cold. Now the same refusal was being understood as loyalty. William heard the same interpretation and remained silent, because he knew the praise belonged less to him than to the boundary he had finally chosen not to break. Then one front page captured the public mood. A London newspaper ran the headline, "Diana's Last Guardian," with a stark subheading explaining that William had accepted Anne's sole control rather than launch a challenge. Outside Kensington Palace, visitors left flowers beside handwritten messages thanking both of them for protecting Diana's private voice. The gesture turned a legal struggle into something human. William saw a photograph of those flowers, folded the newspaper shut, and gave one final instruction: reconvene the briefing. This time, he would not enter the room trying to recover authority from Anne. He would enter carrying forward the lesson Diana had built into the archive itself. The royal briefing eventually resumed, but its purpose had completely changed. William no longer entered the room demanding to know why Diana's archive had been placed beyond his direct control. He already knew. His mother had not chosen Anne over her son. She had chosen a safeguard for him. And when William finally addressed the advisors waiting around the table, he transformed what could have become another royal feud into something rarer. A deliberate decision to respect a boundary he possessed the power to resent. William spoke without hesitation. The prince confirmed that no legal challenge would be made against Anne's custodianship, the responsibility Diana had created to protect and control access to her private archive under fixed conditions. He instructed the household to treat that arrangement as separate from palace authority. The decision mattered because it placed his mother's written wishes above convenience, rank, and the temptation to reopen old wounds simply because the monarchy now had the power to do so. Charles listened, knowing there was nothing he could rewrite. The king understood that forcing access would repeat the same pressures Diana had tried to escape when she created the safeguards in the first place. He supported William's decision quietly, accepting that some parts of the past could not be repaired through control. For father and son, that acceptance carried weight. One had lived through the history, the other had inherited its emotional consequences. Anne finally told William that she had never wanted power over Diana's memory. The Princess Royal had wanted only to keep the promise she was given. He answered that this was precisely why his mother had trusted her. The suspicion that had driven their first confrontation disappeared in that moment. Anne had not inherited Diana's story. She had inherited the responsibility to stop anyone, including William, from misusing its meaning. The final terms remained simple. The sealed records would stay sealed where Diana required it. Permitted material would remain available only under Anne's supervision. No challenge would follow. No family rupture would be allowed to grow from the decision. What began as a crisis of authority ended as an act of restraint. William paused at the doorway after the meeting while Anne gathered the archive papers. He looked back and thanked her for keeping the promise to his mother. Then he left without asking for the key. What began with a cancelled royal briefing ended with something far more important than possession. Diana's safeguard survived. Anne's loyalty was vindicated. Charles accepted a boundary he could not command away. And William discovered that honoring his mother did not mean owning every piece of her past. The archive remained with Anne, but Diana's real legacy rested in William's decision to let it stay there. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next